webinar is part of this initiative. In current crisis of COVID-19, he is encouraging us to be engaged in positive and constructive activities. I hereby welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, for his august presence in this webinar and chair the session. Our eminent speaker, Dr. Norman Aslam, is amongst us already. On behalf of MAKAUT WB family, I welcome you, sir. Without any further delay, I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, to address the attendees and deliver his keynote speech.
Well, thank you, Dr. Suparna Vishwas, for inviting me at this webinar and to talk at the very beginning, because it's a customary measure for me to talk at all these webinars at the beginning without knowing the subjects even. You see this here after this pandemic scenario, that onset of this pandemic scenario, we have already migrated to another, this type of culture, another type of world, which you are calling now, it is a new normal. Perhaps it's new normal. We do not know. We have to wait further to see how long this situation continues to describe it as a new normal scenario. But the thing is here in almost all parts of this globe, most of these people they have become confined at their home, and under this scenario, this one of the most affected case probably for all these countries is this universities and education sector, because there are some essential services and all these things for those continuation of those things. The people they need to go to offices and workplaces. But in most of these countries, the universities, academic institute that have not yet started, which was there earlier, and likely in a physical mode at the campus itself. And then we decided to continue our teaching learning system for engaging our learning community in the most possible and probable way and formidable way through this virtual platform, digital platforms, or by organizing a series of special talks through webinars and through this video conferencing route. And this is a matter of pride for me that all of our faculties, our departmental heads, directors of school, they have taken very keen interest in organizing these webinars, inviting experts of different domains for sharing their knowledges and expertise to our students and our researchers, our inter-learning community, which this is one of the good thing for this scenario. This perhaps this is one of the this gain for us at this pandemic scenario. Otherwise, it was not that much possible for us to organize these types of special talks by inviting these experts of different domains, because this traveling and all these things that takes time, and we organize international conference seminars, but that may be once or twice in a year. But here, almost every day, we are being able to connect digitally to numbers of experts, the doyens of their fields through this virtual platform. So this is the uniqueness and advantage of this digital world. So here, one of the interesting topic today, this webinar for which this webinar has been organized, it is Internet of Things, particularly for healthcare sectors, and also these aspects of data security for this digital system. Considering the fact that in country like India, where quality healthcare is still unaffordable by a larger section of masses who are residing at the remotest corners of the country, tier 2, tier 3 cities, villages, and many areas where healthcare facilities has not been extended and developed to that extent. And for the last, these few years, our government was trying to develop this digital India concept, and one of the mandate was this digital health, AI artificial intelligence applications, IoT, and all these things in healthcare sectors to make this healthcare accessible and affordable to a larger section of these masses. So this is one thing, and this situation has been accelerated or received momentum, renewed momentum in this pandemic scenario because of this this contagious nature of this disease. Compelled many of our healthcare professionals to reinvent or to re-explore these digital health options. I know personally many of these healthcare professionals who are directly connected with me. They have taken a renewed interest in digital health because of the fact that most of these medical practitioners, they are facing problems, this as far as infection is concerned. So that's why digital health has become, this buzzword or a very important aspect in healthcare scenario in this at this time. Even government has introduced the concept of telemedicines and this digital health publicly a few days before at many places. So therefore, this is the right time to empower ourselves with the knowledge of this digital health, particularly this role of all these IoTs and sensors, which are very much crucial in taking up these things, and how this data and all these things can be securely preserved in the digital domain. That knowledge is required. And what I believe that as a university, our role is to empower our students with new skills and new knowledge so that they become more relevant in coming days. And Internet of Things, digital health, these are very, these important areas which are coming up and where a large number of professionals will be required in near future. And this is a very good career option for these budding professionals, for all these students who are in the professional programs. And Internet of Things, not only for the healthcare sectors, but in other areas also, is equally important. For India, I know this one of the commodity which has been being exported tremendously. It is Internet of Things, wearable devices, sensors, and all these things. For the last few months, in the last 6 months or 1 year, the figure goes like that. That large numbers of wearables, large numbers of sensors and IoT devices are being imported to India, and these are being used, and these many organizations, research institutes, many government sectors, and this is the time now we should know what are the different facets of these particular subjects, what are the different types of IoT devices, sensors, and all these things are being used, what is the mechanisms, this functionality, the processes, all these things we should know. We should delve into the details of all these things to know the present context and to know how the future is shaping in coming days. And at the same time, how best all this data, because data security is of crucial importance right now, and this healthcare data security is also very, very important. So how this data has to be secured properly, and how these IoT devices that can be used in a more user-friendly manner, in a more effective manner, how this efficiency and all these things can be improved further. What are all the things which are controlling factors in this direction? We should know all these things, and therefore, among us today, Dr. Aslam is present, who is a very well-known expert in this field. He will be sharing his knowledge, and my personal belief is all our participants, all these attendees, they will be immensely benefited from the deliberations of Dr. Aslam. This is one message I continue at each and every webinar. For this webinar, our objective was not to make it a one-time phenomenon. We tried to make it a sustainable things, and for that we have created one discussion forum with these webinars, where all these participants, they can post their queries and questions and opinions, so that in future we are expecting for development of a knowledge community in this area, for culturing these subjects in a better way, and to evolve further knowledge in this area. And Dr. Aslam will be there. I think he will be kind enough to answer some of your questions here, but within the limited constraint of time. Maybe that can be, this answered at a later stage. But all the participants, they should come forward with their inquisitiveness, with their serious, sincere intention for knowing these things in a better way. That's why active listening, active, this participation is very important. for this very important subject area. And after all, as I said earlier, this is for your betterment only, because you see, in coming days, I can assure you, huge numbers of professionals will be required in this field, and this is the right time to empower ourselves with the knowledge and skill in this area. So with this, I think this is the time has come to start a serious technical discussion in this area. So my sincerest congratulations to Dr. Suparna Vishwas, Mr. Sayantani Saha for organizing this webinar today, and thanks again to Dr. Aslam, as you have come amongst us, and we believe that your presence and your deliberations will benefit us tremendously. And with this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much. I'll be here for some times, but at 6:30 I have another meeting, so I am taking your excuses because I have to that time by that time. So, but the discussion should continue. And my request to Dr. Vishwas and Dr. Saha to coordinate entire thing in the best possible way. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your valuable words. I am sure all of us shall be highly motivated with your inspiring words. As we are aware of your busy schedule, we would be happy if you can spare some time with us. So with your due permission, I am moving on to the technical session. Our eminent speaker in first session, Dr. Norman Aslam, is already with us. So without any further delay, I welcome you, sir, in this webinar.
Just a minute, I forgot to mention Dr. Biplab Sikda. Just now I can see his name. So he is also with us. So thank you, Dr. Sikda, for remaining present over here, for sharing your views. And we'll be organizing these types of webinars again and again, and we expect that you will be kind enough to share your knowledge by sparing some of your valuable times, remaining present amongst us in the near future also. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I welcome Dr. Biplab Sikda, sir, also. A very good evening and welcome, sir, in this webinar.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we are moving on to towards our first technical session, which will be delivered by our eminent speaker, Dr. Norman Aslam. I am privileged to get the opportunity to welcome Dr. Norman Aslam as an invited speaker to deliver his talk in this webinar. He will speak on wireless body area networks and smart IoT systems for pervasive healthcare. In current context of COVID-19, it is needless to mention that application of IoT in healthcare is highly relevant in today's scenario. I am happy to share that I have been associated with Dr. Norman Aslam from my postdoctoral research in Northumbria University in Erasmus Mundus funded C-Link project, where he was a team lead. So before his talk starts, a very brief introduction of our eminent speaker to the participants before he delivers his talk. Dr. Norman Aslam is an associate professor reader in the Department of Computer and Information Science, Northumbria University, UK. Before joining Northumbria University as a senior lecturer in 2011, he worked as an assistant professor at Dalhousie University, Canada. He received his PhD in engineering mathematics from Dalhousie University, Canada in 2008. Dr. Norman is leading the Network Systems and Security Research Group at Northumbria University, UK. His research interests cover diverse but interconnected areas related to communication networks. His current research efforts are focused on addressing problems related to wireless body area networks and IoT, network security, QoS-aware communication in industrial wireless sensor networks, and application of artificial intelligence in communication networks. He has led an Erasmus Mundus Action 2 project titled Sustainable Green Economics through Learning, Innovation, Networking, and Knowledge Exchange, in short, G-Link, which is funded by European Union worth 3.03 million euros. He has published over 100 papers in peer-reviewed journals and conferences. Dr. Norman is a member of IEEE and IAENG. His title of talk is Wireless Body Area Networks and Smart IoT Systems for Pervasive Healthcare. This talk will present recent research into developing pervasive healthcare solutions using W-band and smart IoT systems. In particular, the talk will highlight key research challenges that are key to building viable systems for pervasive healthcare. So over to Dr. Norman Aslam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suparna, and thank you very much, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Maitra, for inviting me to give this lecture webinar at your university. So let me, it's such a pleasure and honor for me indeed. So let me just share my screen first, and so that I can get started. Okay. Right. Again, thank you very much for the introduction. And my talk will be focused on wireless body area networks and smart IoT systems for pervasive healthcare. And Dr. Suparna, as well as Professor Maitra, has, very rightly said that this is the appropriate time to know more about these technologies, to learn about these technologies, and in essence, to gain a deeper understanding how these technologies can basically transform our daily lives as well as our societal systems as well. Right, so before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge the key collaborators. I mean, I've been working on wireless sensor networks, IoTs, for some time. However, I mean, my research work that is related to, in particular, wireless body area networks and wireless sensor networks, as well as IoT, stems from my collaboration that originated in Jadavpur University through Dr. Chandray Chaudhary, through Samiran, through Dr. Suparna, and other fellows from G-Link and C-Link funded project by the European Union. Right, so here is the outline of my talk. And I mean, I've kept this talk as sort of a tutorial, so I'll be giving a brief overview and introduction about what wireless sensor networks and IoT actually are. Then we will discuss the role of wireless body area networks and smart IoT in pervasive healthcare applications. We'll try to understand what actually pervasive healthcare means. We'll discuss some key technical challenges in communication technologies that are relevant for W-bands and IoT. And then we'll also look at some recent research and latest development, followed by the concluding remarks. Right, so I guess in order to understand IoTs, I mean, one has to take a trip down the memory road and understand the evolution of wireless sensor networks to IoTs. And this evolution initially started, way back approximately about 20 years ago, or just right after year Y2K, the event where the advancements in sensing, MEMS, communication, and computation technologies led to this concept of sensor networks. And essentially that integrated three core components, which is sensors, because sensors were becoming available rather than large mechanical sensing. People were able to develop a small microchip-based sensors, and that powered with wireless comms from RF and improved computation and processing capabilities led to this rise of sensor networks. And the idea of sensor networks was, well, computers are expensive, so we can have a smaller microcontroller very small, low-cost sensing. And when we can basically equip with this wireless communication interface. And whatever the sensing phenomena may be, these devices can interact or monitor the physical phenomena up close and personal in large quantity, and then we could have basically a large set of data points that will allow us to better understand that physical phenomena. So wireless sensor networks essentially relied on spatial and temporal interpretation of data points through these low-cost technologies, right? So a building block of sensor node, I mean, this is a picture that shows you one of the earliest sensor nodes by a company originally known as Crossbow, then bought by Mamsic, which is a Talos B. Those are those people initially working in sensor nodes, are very much familiar with this platform. And as you see, pretty much, it's a small mini computer in itself. With limited capabilities, has a power supply, has a microcontroller, sensor, memory, and some actuation if required. And I mean, this gives us a wide range of possibilities. Sensors could be temperature, pressure, humidity, motion, light, hazardous gases. So you can imagine that the initial promise of sensor networks was quite promising, right? And over the years, I mean, there have been a lot of evolution in terms of how these devices evolved through the course of last 15 to 20 years. I mean, earlier devices, which are sort of on the left, you see, of course, offered CPUs and limited memory, very small data rates, because of the fact that, well, these devices were designed to be low cost. They were designed to be deployed in large numbers, basically reporting data to a central sink for interpretation by some user-built application. And over these last, I think, 10 years, there's been phenomenal change in terms of the capabilities, what these devices are capable. I mean, now you could create sensor networks with Raspberry Pis, Wasmort by Libelium, another very popular company, PyCom by Wi-Fi. These are some of the currently popular platform for, you could say, sensor network / IoT devices. But then these devices are much more capable in terms of what they have to offer in terms of memory, in terms of their processing capabilities, in terms of variety of different type of communication interfaces that could be attached. I mean, now it's possible to attach Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Sigfox, LTE, and various kind of even LoRa. So various different options are available, right? So I think it's important to understand the convergence of WSNs to IoT. I mean, this paradigm shift from sensing, communication, and computing, essentially you can think that eventually transformed or converged to what we know as Internet of Things. So when we realized that, all right, so we can connect sensors with a COM interface, and then we can make use of this data, then people started thinking about physical objects. And then this concept of IoT essentially evolved, where devices, things, we could refer to things which are not really a computer, but related to a physical process, and then that side could generate some type of data. So in essence, this convergence took place where sensing, interconnection, intelligent processing, storage, which is facilitated by today's cloud computing, fog computing, edge computing, that capability together with data analytics and machine learning. So they have really powered what are possible with IoT or Internet of Things. So Internet of Things you can think of as a collection of physical objects controlled and monitored over the internet. They are still monitoring something, but it's more about device to device or machine to machine, bringing smartness into daily physical objects. you can think about an example, like, for example, take an example of smart home. So, you have devices that are connected to your thermostat. Your thermostat will basically monitor the surrounding and learn about the temperature that that relates to your preferred settings, learn about the presence, and then basically it can automate those settings and build intelligence to it, where it will learn habits and patterns, and then also present you with options to optimize the use of energy as well as do cost saving. So just one small example. So this has been, I think, contributed by two laws, these Bell's law and Moore's law. These are, I think, quite known. Moore's law states that stuff such as transistors double every 1 to 2 years, whereas Bell laws of computing suggest that we have a new computing class every 10 years. So we move from very large computers with one computer for many to very smaller devices, eventually leading us to pervasive and ubiquitous computing. Right. So in form of IoT, I mean, IoT as a technology is really taking off. And I mean, this graph or this slide tells you the status of affairs in terms of how many different devices are IoT devices are globally connected, right? So if we look at this data at the moment, I mean, currently we have about 9.9 billion devices that are connected, and you could see the exponential growth in this domain within the 5 years. I mean, this number is expected to go up, because imagine the possibilities again. Imagine each physical object that can provide some sort of data, and with this data tool, we could improve our lives. We could, efficiently devise or design new systems, and we can ultimately improve our quality of life. So there are many IoT applications, starting from environmental monitoring to where you could monitor the environment, smart home, wearable technologies, smart grid, which involves utility companies, connected vehicles, smart city, even industrial automation, to smart agriculture and medical healthcare, which offers a lot of possibilities in which very positive contributions could be made to the society. So I think in order to understand the IoTs, this picture is really important, because essentially, as I said, I mean, the IoT revolution has been fueled by development in other technologies which relate to pervasiveness of the clouds, which present us with the capacity to store data online. Fog nodes, which is data storage and processing capabilities moving closer to the edge. So if you look at this architecture, I mean, these are our end or edge devices, which will ultimately be in billions. Then we have pervasiveness of fog and edge nodes, which will be hopefully billions. And then we have cloud. So this pyramid is converging and basically facilitating all this ecosystem, which would be useful for IoTs to flourish and have many applications that could be seamlessly integrated in our daily lives. Right. So as I mentioned, I mean, one of the applications which is for coming out of IoT is basically healthcare related applications, right? And as Professor Mitra was basically very rightly suggesting that, well, in the light of pandemic, I mean, beyond many other things, people have really realized how much potential today's technological development pose to us in doing many things in a way that were never thought before, or basically we have gone beyond our potential to make things work. And the idea of pushing smart and pervasive healthcare has been in the pipeline for some time. And there's a lot of work going already, but this just recent pandemic has made us realize that is very much a possibility, that these systems, I mean, there is already a lot of innovation in place, and by pushing these technologies, we can certainly make a much stronger and much significant contribution to our healthcare system. So there are some key drivers pushing the smart and pervasive healthcares. Of course, we know that the pressures on health systems are basically ever increasing due to rise in population. We have societies that are aging, and I mean, in many countries, even countries such as India, the aging society is on the rise. Together with that, we have physicians, therapists, pharmacists, nursing staff, or healthcare and medical professionals. Their shortage on a global scale. So, because I mean, we don't have facilities and infrastructure, or we don't have even institutions to produce that much of a healthcare professionals and caring staff that is needed to serve the population needs and demands. Then, of course, with all these other issues, we have special training in chronic management, and dementia are needed. I mean, these are things which come with, of course, aging population. And then finally, of course, the latest development is the technology for remote patient monitoring, telemedicine, which relates to diagnostic and intervention, assisted living, and so on. Right. So just quickly give you a view to support these numbers. So this is a global view taken from a United Nations data very recently, and shows, by 2030 we'll have approximately 1.4 billion people who are 60 and above. So this is, of course, a significant population to care for. Some very quick view of aging in India. That's you could see that basically, as the societies develop, the mean age increases, people live longer, and that's obviously adding pressures to our healthcare system. So in the present scenarios, we see that the millions of people die from cancer, cardiovascular disease, Parkinson, obesity, diabetes, and many more from chronic or fatal disease every year. And research shows that most of these diseases can be prevented if they are detected and managed at the early stages, right? So this is where the promise of pervasive healthcare comes in, which allows us to integrate these tech into our daily lives, into our homes and so on, care facilities. So we could basically certainly improve and manage the situation better. In particular, the Indian scenario is, we have NCD, of non-communicable diseases, which include diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, and we have then communicable diseases, which are waterborne, TB, HIV, which were major problem a few decades ago, but it's slowly on the decline. But taking into this context of NCDs, I mean, India is experiencing a rapid health transition with the rising burden of NCDs surpassing the burden of communicable diseases. So we are at a stage where those problematic areas, we have the advances in healthcare and advances in antibiotics and treatments. We have been able to manage and cure those communicable diseases pretty well. But now the problem is the other non-communicable disease, which much relate to sometimes genetics, sometimes life patterns, sometimes mismanagement or not properly management owns health and wellness. So this is where the concept of pervasive healthcare could really come into play, and help us build societies in which people could live healthy lifestyles for a longer period of time, right? So this slide basically shows the promise of what pervasive healthcare could do if we have a protective healthcare management system, which allows us early detection and prevention of a disease. Of course, we can avoid this situation where people would be able to enjoy a healthy lifestyle for a much longer duration of time. So in this context, we also try to understand that what exactly is pervasive healthcare. And pervasive healthcare, I mean, I could say that pervasive healthcare, in a nutshell, we can say that it addresses a set of related technologies and concepts that help integrate a healthcare more seamlessly to our everyday life, regardless of our space and time, right? And of course, this concept of pervasive healthcare is supported by relevant computing and IT applications and technologies. I mean, it involves the concept of pervasive computing, which allows us to visualize or to have a vision for computing, where computing is basically available 24/7. It is there to make our lives more enriching experience by interacting with the surroundings that we live in. The computing is basically embedded in the environment. Then we have wellness management. I mean, wellness management, of course, is a field which relates to learning about own health, knowing about practices, therapies, which one could use to lead a healthy lifestyles. Health informatics, of course, information engineering that allows us to store, manage healthcare information as efficiently as we can. Mobile and telemedicine, telehealth, telemedicine, these technologies we know. Recent developments in the smart wearable technologies and ambient intelligence technologies. So all these available anytime, anywhere to anyone with this, this concept of availability allows us to envision this concept of pervasive healthcare. Right. So one, I think, core component of a pervasive healthcare is, of course, the smart healthcare, where we can have a living environment at home that can be made smart enough to detect any vital signs and communicate it to a proper place. I mean, it could be a nursing station, maybe an intelligent AI system at the other end, or hospital, or your dietitian or whatever, right? So the key concept is that we have the capacity embedded through monitoring of some physiological vital signs, and then we have a capacity to basically deal with that type of data, right? So that allows us to, of course, detect at an early stage for any abnormal conditions or any abnormalities that would come about. And that saying that monitoring vital signs, such as, for example, heart rate, allows patients to engage in their normal activities rather than staying at home or close to a specialized medical service, right? So here is the conceptual view of what is entailed in the smart health monitoring system, right? So here, what you can think about it, or you can view, is basically a three-tier architecture. So there's a tier one, which is responsible for monitoring vital signs and or maybe, ambient or contextual information around a person. this is the tier number one. Then you have basically the second tier, where this monitored data is sent to a local access point or a cellular network. And then you have third tier, which is basically where this information is sent to relevant professional for management, for interpretation, for analysis, and performing any data analytics, right? So here we see an end-to-end transmission path of this variety of different medical and contextual data that we can collect from a person. And then this would be basically fed into our health monitoring system to allow us to interpret the data for understanding, for detecting any abnormal patterns, and that's then just to intelligently and informatively allow us to improve our lifestyle, right? And I mean, in this, we can think that, well, such a system would allow a large amount of data to be collected, and it will be ultimately helpful to determine the most effective strategies about treating chronic illnesses or any disability condition, and just ultimately improving the quality of life, right? And at the very essence of it, you could see there are, again, different sensor interactions that interact with the person's body, whether it's an ECG, blood pressure, glucose, oxygen level, your motion, or even looking at infrared camera through your body temperature, or depth camera looking at basically contextual surroundings and all that. Right. So just some quick slides, I think, to let you know about different devices and sensors. I mean, as mentioned, there's been a lot of development in wearable tech and devices and sensors that we see around us. I mean, even the smartphone that we carry, carries a number of sensors that could be used in a variety of different applications. I mean, even the phone that I carry, for example, the Samsung phones, they have a sensor which allows you to monitor your oxygen saturation as well as heart rate, right? And then not to mention the accelerometer and other motion or inertial sensors that are quite common. There's a whole, I think, ecosystem of wearable technologies for pervasive health. I mean, I just took the slide or this picture from a research group from University of Buffalo in US, where they are doing research on a wide range of products, starting from smart bed sheets to smart cushions to smart headsets to smart gloves. A lot of wearable tech for pervasive healthcare. Right. So we see that a crucial component of this smart monitoring systems, is revolves around this concept of being able to monitor a person around a human body, right? So that's where this concept of body area network has evolved. So we have this WBAN, or wireless body area networks. So it is a network of wearable or implantable computing devices. And I'll have some slides later on to show you that the sensors that we are talking about, I mean, they can come in different shape and form. They could be sensors which one could basically wear on a body, which are non-invasive in nature. But then there are sensors which could be essentially implanted inside a body through a surgical operations. And these sensors, of course, they would measure various physiological signals, including blood pressure, ECG, electrocardiography, electrosonography, EEG, EKG, pulse, oximeter, motions, and so on, right? So when we have these multitude of different type of sensors, and each is performing a different function. Of course, then the desire is that these different sensors have the communication capability to either communicate with each other if required, or depending on the functionality of the network, but or to a coordinator. And essentially that allows us to form this concept of forming a WWAN, right? Right. So nodes essentially are placed in star multi-hop topology, right? This slide basically shows different implantable medical devices, and these range from insulin pumps to gastric stimulators to cardiac pacemakers to deep brain neurostimulators and so on, right? So for example, the picture on the right here, which is the wireless pacemaker developed by St. Jude Medical. This one here, which is from Shimmer Wireless, it's a non-invasive node, which one can basically just wear around its belt, but you see these connections for small black and red, where it has wires which would hook up to your chest to record the ECG. And then we have basically inertial sensors to capture the motion. So there's a wide variety of different type of devices and sensor kit that are available nowadays that allow these sensing, communication, and processing capabilities for body area networks. So body area networks, I mean, we see, well, once we can have these sensors, of course, the possibilities, not only healthcare, but there are many other applications in which body area networks show promise, ranging from sports to gaming and entertainment to, detecting fatigues in soldiers and so on. So there are a wide range of varieties in which these body area networks could contribute. So as far as wireless standards are concerned, I mean, this is sort of a comprehensive picture showing wireless body area network as a very small part. And if you notice that, well, wireless body area network, we are talking about a very small coverage range, right? So range which covers basically less than 2 to 5, between 2 to 5 meters, practically speaking. And data rates, of course, we are not talking about streaming movies or streaming images. Of course, depending on different type of sensors, the data sampling rate may be different, but typically speaking, we don't have as strenuous data rate requirements in communication for wireless body area networks as compared to the other type of network. Then we see that, well, I mean, of course, there are some standardization efforts. There's a standard ratified by IEEE, which is 802.15.6, which defines basically the communication physical and MAC for the wireless body area networks. Right, so let's look at some research challenges in wireless body area networks. And I mean, I'll list some of these challenges here. Of course, what we are doing in wireless body area networks is that the nodes could be either installed on a body or implanted inside the body, right? And if the nodes are implanted inside the human body, then of course we have to be very much aware of how often they communicate, how much heat they generate, because there's a circuitry involved. There's some RF transceiver that goes in that node. So, that may have a very small battery as well. So ultimately, it will generate some energy, and what we don't want is basically for it to generate so much energy that it could damage the implanted tissue around the implant. Then, of course, energy. I mean, that's saying that energy is a very crucial factor. I mean, especially if the node is implanted, then changing its battery every now and then is not a good thing and not practical. Reliability, of course, we are talking about basically communication here, which is reliable. Of course, we are measuring physiological signals, vital signs. So we want communication to be reliable, 100% reliable. Communication is done in real time. Of course, communication, scalability, fault tolerance, and security are the key concerns here, right? So, of course, the nodes that we are talking about, of course, they are resource constraints nodes, and these challenges are essentially quite essential to address. Right. So I'll briefly describe some of my effort with the research people that I've collaborated in Jadavpur University with Dr. Chaudhary on designing and proposing some efficient wireless band routing protocols. And of course, I mean, for people who are in network and communication, when we are talking about body area network, I mean, routing seems like a far-fetched concept. Okay, so why exactly do I need to route? But of course, considering the challenges, considering the energy efficiency challenge, our essential goal here is to do everything else, but also conserve energy as well. And in wireless domain, of course, sending transmission over smaller multiple hops may be more energy efficient than sending a one large transmission with a much higher power. So taking this into account, so one of our earlier work basically revolved around proposing this W-band routing protocol, which looked at different various factors such as energy, thermal, link quality, transmission powers, and developed a heuristic-based protocol to optimize the energy efficiency. Then, I mean, the slides basically shows different sources of energy consumption that could occur, and we see that transmission is a significant part of it. So there are different trade-offs that when designing a protocol that we need to do. So higher power level, of course, leads to good link quality and low end-to-end delay, but increase interference, contention, packet collision, decrease throughput. And if we, on the other end, if you have a lower power level, that leads to saving energy, but the other challenges which are quite crucial in healthcare applications is high end-to-end delay and link quality. So there's an optimal trade-off that we aim to achieve. Then again, considering the comms side and designing optimal transmission strategies using MDP or Markovian decision process. This work was relatively recently published in sensors, MDPI sensors, again by Dr. Chaudhary and her team. So in this, what we do is we take into account a variety of input conditions. We feed it to a Markovian decision process engine, and then based on that intelligence, then we basically define or obtain an optimal transmission policy, whether or not a node makes to make a single hop or multi-hop, and that decision process is then fed into the routing protocol. So you see that some of initial effort, of course, and part of it until now even dedicated at effective and efficient communication, making sure that if we have this concept of W-band, we can design a W-band that that fulfills its promise of reliable and energy efficient communication. Then some other application-oriented work. This is not my work, but one of my colleagues. And essentially, this work is around detecting physical activity classification in free living conditions. And that just tells you what is possible. I mean, in this, the idea is very simple. The idea is essentially you have inertial sensors, and using the data from inertial sensors, irrespective of where they are deployed, we try to classify different type of activities in elderly to better manage their living conditions. So different spots for sensors are chosen. Sensors could be deployed on waist, on chest, on foot, on thigh, or on wrist. And then basically interpretation with the help of machine learning, applying machine learning and classification. Then we can basically classify and choose the best strategy. This work is not directly related to WBAN and IoT, but I thought it would be good to tell how other ambient technologies and ambient intelligence technologies could be useful to determine various conditions and ultimately could feed into the ecosystem of pervasive health. Here, the idea is essentially also relatively simple. I mean, here we perform gait analysis, which basically lets us how people walk, particularly elderly people, walk for musculoskeletal and neurological disorder diagnosis. And this is done so with basically using Microsoft Kinect and motion capture kits by capturing gait movement of people and then developing an AI-based system that takes into account different features that involve movement features, distance, stride, relative joint distance, and so on. And then with the AI-based techniques, then you could help classify and train the system that will be able to tell if a person has any such disorder or not. Then this was another work done by Dr. Mohsin and some other collaborators in University of Leeds and Middlesex. And it's a combination of basically using IoT as well as AI and deep learning to diagnose and monitor Alzheimer's patient. And the idea was such that basically, if a patient has diagnosis, of course, we use machine learning to do image processing based detection of whether or not some early conditions or Alzheimer's exist. Of course, this could be done in developing an AI-based system which could label and classify that data. And then once a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, daily activities can be monitored using the proposed scheme, which makes use of assistive technologies and machine learning. And machine learning based monitoring and recommendation system is then suggested, is then basically suggests the human interventions if required to better and efficiently manage that condition. All right, so this was an overview of some of my work. I mean, of course, there are other works as well, but I would just, in the interest of time, I think I would not go into those details. But I think it's also, I would point out some other recent developments that have been going on and that caught my eye because, I mean, I talked about what we have been working on as problems related to energy efficiency. So this is an interesting recent innovation in WBAN, which addresses the problem of energy efficiency in a very unique way, basically, right? And this is basically a development which was published in Nature Electronics by National University of Singapore. And what they did was they developed a new metamaterial textile which can gather signals from nearby sensors and then transmit them over a conductive piece of clothing. So essentially, I mean, even if you have a body area network and multiple sensors, and every sensor is working at the same time. So with the help of this conductive clothing that is worn by a person, very little energy is consumed throughout the system, because you have end-to-end transmission path to this conductive clothing. And then essentially you're able to solve or address the energy efficiency problem in a much different manner. Then we have, again, another interesting concept of IVN, or in vivo networking, whereas you can communicate with the wireless implantable devices through RF. Basically, you don't need any batteries, you don't need any battery power, so you develop basically a system which would be which could then use basically the RF transmissions, and then that transmission has enough or sufficient energy to do whatever functions this device needs to do. So this is developed by MIT and Birmingham, a new system to power and communicate in device deeply implanted inside the human body. So systems like this could be used in many applications. For example, a controlled drug delivery for different patients such as malaria, Alzheimer's, to monitor candidates' conditions of their organs internally, or to provide stimulus activity to any brain or neurotransmission systems. So that's quite a interesting concept indeed, right? So now, finally, I think in the interest of time, I'll talk about some of the challenges in pervasive healthcare. And there are many challenges to transform this vision of pervasive healthcare to where we are now, to where we would like it to be in future, right? So we have to overcome many hurdles and solve many challenges. And one of the key challenges here is, which I think is quite crucial, is security and privacy, right? In some countries, I mean, privacy may not be an issue, but in Western countries, of course, privacy is quite a major concern. So security and privacy, those both make a very important and crucial challenge to be addressed for not only pervasive healthcare system, but rather all IT systems. But the implications of compromised security and privacy is much more severe in healthcare than anywhere else. Then we have, of course, interoperability and integration. So we have a number of players. Each one is doing their own thing, their own silo, building things which developing languages, interfaces which don't really talk to each other and not interoperable. So if we are talking about this concept of pervasiveness, of course, the standardization and interoperability needs to work in hand, right? Then, of course, quality of service and reliability. So medical profession, I mean, as a profession, is very heavily regulated because human life is involved, right? So the concept of anything that we do, whether it's sensor development to monitor certain physiological signal, or whether it's communication, the concept of quality of service and reliably and accurately transmitting that signal to where it is needed within the prescribed bounds and thresholds of its quality is absolutely important. And then, of course, in order for people to work on work together in pervasive healthcare systems. We need to develop smart interfaces that are understandable, that are easy to use, and that are basically user friendly. So last couple of slides, just security, why security is important. A few years ago at a cyber security conference, which is very well known in the field, DEF CON, people demonstrated, the researchers demonstrated that it was possible to hack an insulin pump. Now that tells you, right? So if someone is able to hack the insulin pump and alter the quantity of insulin that's injected to a patient, then of course it's a potential fertility and serious crime that you're talking about here, right? So in order to realize this vision of pervasive healthcare, what we need is a smart and secure healthcare system, end-to-end system. So we need basically security of the medical information that is transmitted between different stakeholders and entities, involving appropriate secure cryptographic mechanisms. We need to have secure authentication, mutual authentication procedures in place, and then of course third-party certifications and all that could fit into this architecture. But in a nutshell, an end-to-end secure patient-centric design is needed, right? So with that note, I think I'll just summarize that IoT is being more expanded, brings more expanded approach to smart healthcare with diverse verticals such as remote monitoring, clinical care, preventive care, and wellness management. Security and privacy remains one of the major concerns. There's also a need for standardization, interoperability, and friendly and useful interfaces. And no doubt, there's absolutely no doubt that the pervasive healthcare concept will continue to evolve and mature as the technology mature, and ultimately it will be greatly beneficial to the society. With that note, I think I will thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening us with your technical expertise and achievements in the domain of pervasive healthcare enabled with WBAN smart IoT systems. Hope the participants, mostly students, research scholars, and faculty members interested in this research domain could find emerging research problems and scope for further contributions. How illustrative and illuminating Dr. Norman Aslam's talk is gets reflected with the fact that we have got 33 questions posted in our question answer box by the attendees. But due to shortage of time, we will not be able to take all the questions, but obviously sir can later have some time to go through the questions and answer offline. Now we will take few questions.
Sure.
So Shayantani madam, can you please continue with the interaction session?
Yes, madam. Thank you, Shupana madam. So I have chosen some of the questions. Questions like whether remote operation is possible by the help of IoT.
Hello, Shantani ma'am.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question very well. So could you please repeat it for me?
Whether remote operation is possible by the help of IoT.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call a remote operation with the help of IoT. I think that goal is yet to be achieved. But in hospitals, the technology already exists using robotics to perform remote operations. I mean, here where I am in Newcastle upon Tyne, I mean, I've a few friends who work in NHS here. And I mean, they talk of systems which are currently in place, which make it possible to do remote operations where the surgeon is somewhere else. You have basically a robot, but it's a surgeon behind the robot. So you can imagine yourself, playing maybe a video game, sitting somewhere, controlling the movements of the robotic arm. So that's, I mean, I wouldn't entirely call it under the domain of IoT. I mean, that's of course within the larger domain of pervasive healthcare, maybe, but it's more with the robotics. I would rather classify it under robotics. And yes, that technology is already there.
Okay, so thank you. So next question is how we can deal with huge amount of data generated by IoT devices.
Well, that's a very interesting question. And if you can refer to basically one of the slides that I have in my presentation, that, well, we have billions of, we will expect billions of devices that are connected to the edge. And then we have, basically cloud and edge. So the concept of cloud is, of course, cloud provides you huge amount of data, that storage capacity. But then you must also realize that essentially, I mean, even if you, well, even if you think about building, for example, an IoT application which consists of pollution monitoring in the city, right? So IoT, although we are talking about huge amount of data coming from a large number of devices, but again, how large is this data? I mean, in most cases, the IoT devices, they are sensing a phenomena, right? So for example, if we are monitoring a pollution level and a pollution level in a city environment, right? So each sensor would take a reading every, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. And that consists of a few bytes. And where the technology has advanced at this point in time, memory essentially is not a problem, right? So, I mean, my phone now, or your phone now, can easily store, gigabytes of hundreds of gigabytes of memory. So for a small sensor reading, I mean, although there are many sensors, but each reading is few bytes. So still, storage is not a problem. So we have lots of basically infrastructure in the cloud as well as in the edge that is possible to handle large data that comes from IoT devices.
Thank you, sir. Another question is, many of ask same type of questions. So I summarizes it that how to handle the devices are already radiate some they have some radiation, so they increase the temperature. So how to handle this kind of temperature in W band?
Well, there's been a lot of research going on historically on W-band, and that look into basically the threshold of the temperature that is generated by the device, and then you have to take into account the SAR, or specific absorption ratio, right? And for human tissues, there's a specific absorption ratio that you need to account for the threshold. And when you design such a device, you look at different sources of energy expansion, that where the energy is expended. If the energy is expended in transmission, communication, listening. So each of those action is responsible to consume some energy, because some part of the circuitry will be utilized, and as a result, the energy is generated. So what you do around is that when you design your system, you take each of those actions into account, and then you, in your model, you basically make sure that the combination of all of these actions at any given instance in time is not greater than the specific absorption ratio, which is for a specific absorption ratio threshold for a human body.
So I think we are bound with the time schedule. So I think other questions are in our question and answer area, and while this interaction was going on, the number of questions reached to 40. So
Okay, right.
I think it will be increased more. So thank you very much, sir. And if your schedule permits, we will be happy that if you can remain with us, if you can connect it with us for remaining time of the session.
Thank you. I have another meeting very shortly, so I may have to leave, but I'll look into these questions and I'll try to respond as best as I can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
So we are moving on to our next session.
Thank you.
And thank you, sir. And we are having Dr. Biplab Shikdar, sir, speaker of our second session from the very beginning of the webinar. So we welcome you, sir. Okay, sir is sharing his screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we are extremely happy. Yes, sir, your screen is visible.
Great.
Yeah. So now we are extremely happy and privileged to welcome Dr. Biplab Shikdar as our next speaker in this webinar. I welcome you, sir. He will be delivering his invited talk on cybersecurity challenges and solutions for the Internet of Things. We have got a number of questions on the security and privacy issues of Internet of Things in first session only, and we hope that it will increase a lot in the second session, as sir will be delivering his illuminating talk on this emerging research area related to IoT. Now, before Dr. Shikdar delivers his talk, I would briefly introduce him to our respected participants. Dr. Biplab Shikdar is an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the National University of Singapore, where he also serves as a vice dean in the Faculty of Engineering. He received the BTech degree in Electronics and Communication Engineering from Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, India in 1996. The MTech degree in Electrical Engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, India in 1998, and the PhD degree in Electrical Engineering from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Troy, New York, USA in 2001. He was an assistant professor from 2001 to 2007 and associate professor from 2007 to 2013 in the Department of Electrical, Computer and Systems Engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute from 2001 to 2013. He is a recipient of the NSF Career Award, the Tan Chin Tuan Fellowship from National Technology Nanyang Technology University, Singapore, the Japan Society for Promotion of Science Fellowship, and the Leif Erikson Fellowship from the Research Council of Norway. His research interests include IoT and cyber physical system security, network security, and network performance evaluation. Dr. Shikdar is a member of Eta Kappa Nu and Tau Beta Pi. He served as an associate editor for the IEEE Transactions on Communications from 2007 to 2012, and as an associate editor for the IEEE Transactions on Mobile Computing from 2014 to 2017. I am happy to share that I have been introduced with Dr. Shikdar during my visit to his networking lab in National University of Singapore in 2013. And also, I was privileged to welcome him in our university to deliver a talk in 2014 in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. That time he physically visited our Salt Lake campus, but this time we are on virtual platform due to this COVID crisis. Now, without wasting any time, I am moving on to handing over this session to Dr. Siddharth. As IoT data gets transmitted over public networks, hence invites adversaries to tamper with the security and privacy requirements of data, Dr. Siddharth will illuminate us with his illustrative and expert deliberation related to cybersecurity challenges and solutions in IoT applications. Over to Dr. Biplav Siddharth, sir. Sir?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Vishwas. I really enjoyed coming to your campus back in 2016. It just seems funny to me that 6 years have already passed, probably since I came there. It doesn't seem that long. Anyway, hopefully I'll be able to visit next time I'm in Kolkata.
Yes, sir. We will be happy to welcome you, sir.
Sure, thanks.
If everything goes fine with all over the world.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about let's say cybersecurity challenges in IoT, and I would like to thank Dr. Newman for actually setting the stage for IoT and also putting security for IoT in general in context. So that makes my job a little bit easier here. So what the way I have thought about this talk is I'll first start with giving you a general overview of security challenges in IoT. Why is security a challenging problem? What are some of the security issues that come up? Why vulnerabilities and so on? And then in the end, maybe 5-10 minutes, I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we have been doing in micro. Okay? So this is to get you started on how we came to IoT. Some of it has already been talked by Dr. Newman. This is when the internet started really about roughly 40 years ago. And when it started in 1969, there were just 4 computers, all in the western coast of the US. And this gentleman here, Leonard Kleinrock, is considered one of the pioneers of the network. And this big thing here that you see on the screen, almost like a refrigerator, that's actually one of the first routers on the internet. That was the first router, right? And first time 2 computers were talking on the network. It was a remote login application. Somebody from Los Angeles was trying to log into a computer somewhere in San Francisco. And they could only type 3 words, login, L-O-G, and the system crashed after just three characters, right? So that was 40 years ago, and now you imagine what networks have become, how many, the way we watch videos and then download large files. It's been a big change, right, over the last 40 years. And this sort of just shows you an animation from a very US point of view about how the internet evolved over the first 20 years or so of its lifetime. Okay. All right. So going back, the earliest applications on computer networks were really remotely log into a mainframe computer. Back then, people didn't have personal computers or laptops. An organization would probably have one single large computer where people would remotely log in or go in and submit their jobs to execute programs. And back in 71, about 75% of the network traffic, back in 73, about 75% of the network traffic was actually email, right? And then other protocols came in and became popular over time. So FTP, or file transfer protocol, was quite common till the mid-90s. We do Skype, and we are actually, what we are doing right now is some kind of a network voice protocol, even though it has video and other things. This started quite some time back, maybe 1977 and so on. So these were some of the early popular applications on the network. Right? The application that really changed, and back then, most of the users of the network were actually academics or researchers, or maybe some military people. What really changed networks and brought it to the domain of general public was in the early 90s when HTTP was invented. And what that allowed was to, you know, search information much more easily, right? With HTTP, we could locate information wherever it was at whenever time we wanted. So that made the big difference. And with the increasing popularity of internet, people figured out other interesting applications, starting with e-commerce towards late 90s. And then in the mid 2000s, we had social media with things like Facebook coming up. And more recently, we have the sharing economy, right? So we rely a lot on things like um, Grab, and I'm trying to think about names in India, right? Swiggy probably is a sort of a sharing economy where people come and you know, and then I think the common taxis in Kolkata are probably, why can't I remember? There's Uber and there's another one which I normally use, but anyway. Okay, so that's the sharing economy. The other big thing which is coming up, and this is a little bit older in the sense that we are already at 2020, another big application of the networks which we envision is the Internet of Things. And one thing about IoT is that whenever people talk about IoT, you have to add at least 9 zeros behind any number, right? If you can add more zeros behind it, that's even better. So anything with IoT in terms of the number of devices, the amount of data that they generate, and more importantly, maybe for businesses, the amount of money that they will generate, this is fairly large, right? And this number, these slides are actually a bit older, so probably we haven't hit that. So even now, people are saying that this 25 to 50 billion devices will be achieved somewhere in the next 5 years, maybe, right? However, many industries have warmed up to the idea of IoT, and if you look at the industries which are actually adopting IoT technologies, much of them are in terms of building automation, services, and things like that. Okay. All right. So now, while we do believe that IoT has a lot of potential and a lot of industries will be adopting this, there are some challenges before we get to it, right? So all these numbers were predicted for 2020, but probably we are not there yet. Right? So what are the things that held us back? Of course, there are some networking challenges, but another big thing is security concerns associated with IoT. So just to give you an example of what some of these security concerns may be, when we talk about cyber physical systems and IoT and try to give examples of security breaches, the example which probably everybody is familiar with something that happened in Iran back in about 10 years ago. And in this case, this is an Iranian nuclear power reactor. And what happened is some people were able to hack into their system actually through USB thumb drives, and they crashed some of their centrifuges that they use in this nuclear reactor. And as a result, they claim that the Iranian nuclear weapons program was pushed back by about 10 years or so. Other examples, back in 2017 or 2018, actually, sorry, 2015 and 16, both years, there were a couple of attacks on Ukraine's power grid. In those days, Ukraine was in some territorial dispute with Russia over the region of Crimea. So Russia came in and annexed the region of Crimea, and then there was a little bit of a war between Ukraine and Russia, and then people claimed that Russians got in and hacked Ukrainian power grid. And as a result, during peak winter, parts of Ukraine was shut down from the electricity grid. Other example, for example, this is somewhere in the US, in Michigan. So people hacked into their computers and encrypted everything. And then they asked them that pay us some ransom, otherwise you'll never see your files again. And in this case, they actually paid up. Another example of an attack on IoT systems is in the This is one of the most highly valued companies in the world in terms of their market evaluation, few $100 billion. So this is the Saudi Arabian oil company, Saudi Aramco. And back in 2013 or so, they got hacked. And as a result, all the hard disks and their systems, they had to crash, and they wiped out all their data. So they had to reboot and reload everything in their system. So these are just some examples of attacks on cyber physical systems or IoT-based systems. Okay? So these are a bit from the industrial perspective, industrial systems. And if you think about something more recent where they hacked into IoT devices that are commonly found in households, right? So if you look at these are not common IoT devices that we have in your house or my house or in your university, right? So these are high-end industries. More recently, so I think this is 2016 or 17, there was a botnet-based attack. And in this case, what the hackers did was they took over a large number of IoT devices and converted them into a botnet. And then they commanded these IoT devices to launch a denial of service attack on a service called DIN, right? So what DIN is, it's a company, and what it does is it manages DNS services for big companies such as Twitter, Amazon, PayPal, and things like that, right? So if you're a networking person, you're probably aware of what DNS does, but just to refresh your memory. So for us humans, we try to think of, when we want to access a website, we try to think in terms of names, right? www.google.com. So that's easier for humans to remember. But computers, of course, don't work on names. They work on numbers, right? They work on binary digits. And instead of identifying somebody by a name such as www.google.com, computers are identified by IP addresses. And what a DNS service will do is it will convert a name into an IP address. So if you don't know if the DNS service is down and you don't know what's the IP address for www.google.com, you will not be able to access it. So by targeting such a DNS service provider, people who are trying to access www.amazon.com or so on, so what they would do is they would type amazon.com, but then they don't get this translation of the name into an IP address. So as a result, effectively, they cannot access all of these services. And this sort of started sometime in October 2016 and continued and so on. Right? And this is just a chart that kind of shows you about the intensity and where things were affected, where all this traffic was coming from. And this is just to walk you through how such an attack would actually take place, right? So once a particular device is hacked, let's say the attacker is able to hack into a particular IoT device, it takes it over, right? And in this case, what the attackers were trying to do is, since they're trying to launch a denial of service attack, so what happens in a denial of service attack? I pick my target. In this case, the target was the DNS service run by this company called DIN, right? So this is the server I want to target. And how do I target it? I send it a lot of traffic. So much traffic that when legitimate users try to access that server, they cannot get in because the server is way too busy dealing with the traffic coming from these botnets, right? And then if I want to generate a lot of traffic and I'm thinking which IoT devices to hack, what I will do is I will try to hack into things that are related to video, right? Because video in general requires a lot of bandwidth. So in this case, I will hack into a IP camera, for example, or I would hack into your digital video recorder that you use for recording TV programs and so on, right? So if I can hack into those, then I can tell this IP camera to redirect its traffic to the DNS server. So the DNS server gets a lot of traffic. So that's one of the reasons why these cameras and equipment related to video were targeted by the hackers. So anyway, so let's say this IoT device has been hacked by the hacker. So what they will do now is they will use this camera to scan for other vulnerable cameras which are nearby or in the same network. So this camera will keep on scanning, sending packets, looking if there are other cameras or not. So once it finds another new victim camera, it wants to get into that camera. How? You have to give a login and password. So it tries to guess all different combinations of login IDs and passwords, and hopefully one of them will be successful. If it is successful, it will send a report back to a report server. And the report server keeps track of all the new victims that have been found. And then there is this command and control server, which occasionally will check with the report server saying, okay, do you have any new victims? Once it gets the list of new victims, it will tell another server, which is called the loader, saying, okay, here is the list of victims. Now you go and infect them. Infect them with malware so that they will turn into bots. So now it will actually infect with the malicious binary, and then now you have a victim. So now over a period of time, maybe months, maybe years, they collect thousands of these victims. And on the day, for example, on October 21, when they want to launch a denial of service attack, they will send a command to all of these victims saying, direct all your traffic to this particular victim server and overload it. So now we target the victim and then it's overloaded. This was sort of the way it was carried out. So now if you look at the first step here, we scan and then we try to find victims. And then once I find a IP camera that I want to hack into, you have to give it a login and password. So then you might imagine, okay, how would I know what is the login and password? Right? How would the attacker know what's the login and password? It turns out that many of these IoT devices, they don't care so much about security. They just want to make life easy. So in many cases, they would have a default username, usually root, and they would have a default password. So in this case, for this particular IP camera, right, this was the default username and the default password. So if I have this camera, this is the username and password. If you go and you also buy the same camera, your camera also has the same username and password. So if I know that you also own the same camera, I can try and hack into your or log into your device because I know the username and password. And it turns out that such hard-coded passwords are very, very common, and they're often put into the device's firmware. And if you look, there are many, many dictionaries available which will tell you, So in this case, this was one of the examples that I was giving. In many cases, people don't change. The username will be root and the password will be admin. I'm sure many of us have used this. Username is user, password is also user, or username is root, the password is pass, and things like that. So there are all these common things which people can use to exploit. And if you look at the kind of capabilities our hackers have, so this is all within the course of 1 year. So sometime in April, they could launch a denial of service attack, but they would target you with 620 gigabits per second. Sometime in the summer, they went up to 990, and by October they came up to 1200 gigabits per second. Right? So this tells you the kind of resources these kinds of hackers have. Right? Now you might think, okay, these are maybe very sophisticated hackers, so they can spend a lot of time and energy, and they can hack into my IoT devices, and then they can launch denial of service. It turns out that it's actually not very difficult if you want to launch your own denial of service attack on some server, right? So there are many DDoS for hire services. If you want to launch a denial of service attack, you go into the dark internet and you search, you'll find many of these. And they're pretty cheap actually. So for about 20 to 50 US dollars, so that's about, I don't know, 1,400 rupees maybe. You can launch a denial of service attack for 1 hour on one server. So that's not too bad, right? You can do all these things. All right. So I gave you an example of where people were turning cameras and DVRs and other things into bots. So there are many other examples that you will find, and if you just go and search where people try to hack into all kinds of hardware, or people hack into cars and things like that. So there are many different examples out there. And this is just a cartoon that shows, very soon you would probably come into a stage that any smart device that you have in your home is probably vulnerable and is going to be hacked. Right? So that's what we're going to. All right. So hopefully with that sort of introduction to security challenges and security issues in IoT. So now let's look into this in a little bit more detail, right? So let's look into what we want when we talk about security for IoT things. In general, when we talk about security for computer systems, it's usually the CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. So confidentiality says, when I send a message on the network, nobody else should be able to understand what are the contents of that message, right? And this is usually done by encryption. The other one is integrity. And this says, if I send a message on the network, right? If I send a data packet, let's say I have a sensor that measured something and it's sending that measurement on the network. Nobody should be able to change the value of the packet, or nobody should be able to change the data of the packet, or if they change, right? So that's integrity. And then the third part is authentication, and that says that you have to prove your identity. If you claim that you're person X or your computer Y, prove that you're such and such. So this CIA, or confidentiality, integrity, and authentication, this is common in any computer system. This is common, for example, when you're trying to access Gmail or any other email. So for example, you have to do authentication, right? And probably when you send data over the network, for example, when you're doing HTTPS, not the regular HTTP, but HTTPS, it's confidential because it's encrypted, and it'll also ensure integrity. So this is common, and this applies to IoT also. But there are some special things that we need to keep in mind when we are talking about security for IoT. One of the things is many of the IoT devices are actually very simple devices. So if you think of an IoT device, which is a temperature sensor somewhere, right? That is very, very different than your laptop or your smartphone. Your smartphone or your laptop has a pretty good CPU or a processor, and it probably has a decent amount of memory, right? And then, of course, your laptop or your phone needs to be charged periodically, but if the charge goes out, you can plug it in and recharge it. Many sensors that you deploy have very, very simple processors. They have very limited memory, right? And then they are running on a battery with finite power. Right? So in those cases, the security solutions that you use, or the security algorithms or protocols, encryption strategies that you want to use, they need to be lightweight. So if they consume a lot of energy, that's not good. Right? So that's one of the primary concerns. Then there are other things like with IoT devices. I think the previous speaker, he was also talking about privacy, because many of the sensors, they collect data about us. For example, when he was talking about healthcare, so the sensor may be looking at my heartbeat or my cholesterol level or whatever, right? I don't want people to know about those things. I don't want everybody to know about those things. So there may be privacy issues in them. And then many times we generate the data. So let's say my smartphone or my phone, if I have Google Maps on, and when I'm going, let's say from the airport to my home, it tells me what is the traffic on different parts of the route, right? But at the same time, Google also then knows where I am, because it's a two-way thing. Google tells me the route and it tells me the congestion on the road, but it also knows where I am and how much time it is taking for me to move along that road. So they know, right? So what about the privacy and the ownership issues? Who owns that data? And lastly, another big thing, and this is something I'll come up in the end when you talk about IoT, is physical security. At least when we talk about laptops and phones, we assume that the phone or the laptop is always with the user. right? Of course, it may get stolen once in a while, but that's a different matter. But in general, the phone is always with me. My laptop is with me. So I don't need to worry about somebody looking into the contents of my phone or my laptop. However, if you deploy an IoT device by the roadside or out in the open, somebody can come in and put it in their pocket and walk away, right? It can be easily stolen, right? And that makes a difference in terms of security. And we'll come to that in just a bit, right? Now, we have a little bit discussion on security in general. Now we could talk about why are IoT devices targeted. Many reasons, right? One of the things is it's very easy to target IoT devices. For instance, many of the IoT devices are already on or are always on. They're never turned off, right? My laptop, after the talk is over, I'll shut it down. So if a hacker tries to get in, it's not there, so it cannot come in, right? So the amount of time my laptop is available for the hacker to try and get in is limited during the day when I turn on the laptop. And I also need to be connected to the network, right? Otherwise, the hacker cannot come in. But most IoT devices are always on the network and always turned on, right? And many times manufacturers don't really care about security. They want to think that, okay, if I make an IoT device, let's say a smart home, for a smart home application, it needs to be simple. Not everybody is a computer scientist or an electronics engineer. A regular person should be able to buy my IoT device and install it. So if it is very fancy with lots of security and so on, it makes it difficult to use, right? So many manufacturers will say, oh, I would go in favor of usability and compromise on security. And IoT devices, once we deploy, we usually forget about them. We don't go and check on that every day, right? In contrast, if my laptop has a malware, let's say my laptop has a virus, I will get some indication because, for example, it'll become slow. It'll run very hot. The temperature, the CPU will run so much that it'll feel hot to touch. So I will get some idea that my device has been hacked. But that doesn't work with IoT. It's probably on some wall somewhere, and we forget about it. And then there are other things like IoT devices are in large scale. There are millions of them. So if you want to launch a denial of, if you want to turn them into a botnet, it's very attractive, and so on. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the top IoT vulnerabilities. Right? So in many cases, if you buy an IoT device and you open it up, it's probably in some box or some plastic casing. You open it up. What you will see is that they occasionally have serial ports like this, which are open. And what you could do is you could solder wires and then read off things, right? So you could get direct access to the chip or to the memory on the IoT device. So these things are there in the board, in the PCB, because while the IoT device was being manufactured, these were used for testing. Now the testing is done, everything is good. Now we can go and sell this in the market. At the time, I don't need it. But we don't go and design yet another PCB, right? It was there in the original PCB design. We just keep it there. But a hacker can open this and then connect wires and then read what are the contents of the memory. Okay? That can create a problem. Other things. This something we talked about. Many of these IoT devices have default credentials. So for example, when we were talking about this camera, it came with a default username and a default password. Nobody changes these things, right? And if nobody changes, everybody has the same default password. I buy one device, then I know the username and password for all the other devices made by the manufacturer. So that's another issue. Right? The default credentials. And that also comes to the idea about hard coding issues. So many times, if you're able to get to the IoT device firmware, right? If you can get your hands on the IoT device firmware, you will see that there are many secrets which are stored there and you can get. So there are examples. For example, when I teach my course here on IoT security, I will show them a firmware from actually a camera that was manufactured some time back. And if you are savvy enough to read through that firmware, you can see hard-coded usernames and passwords. So those are all those things. And then other things, many times when we are dealing, when we are, dealing with IoT devices and their applications, usually we do it through our mobile phone, right? So for example, let's say if you think about an IoT application about a smart home, where you can turn on the AC in your home on and off from your office, let's say. The way you would do it is you'll open an app on your phone. You will say, okay, the app will let you turn on a light or turn on the AC at your home, right? Now, if there are any vulnerabilities in the web interface or in the mobile app code itself, that can be used to hack into your IoT devices. They're fairly common examples. Then there are issues in the network communications itself. So anywhere in the network protocol stack, whether you're looking at the transport network or link layer, any of the network protocol stack, if you're not careful, there may be vulnerabilities in there. Right? And if your network protocol stack anywhere they're vulnerable, we can have things like man in the middle attack. Somebody may intercept your communication, or they may modify the packets that you're sending, and so on. The other thing which is quite common is many of the files or many of the times we interact with IoT devices, they don't really check the integrity or the signatures that are coming on the packets. So let's say, for example, you have an IoT device, and after some time, the manufacturer of that device decides to do an upgrade on the firmware. So what you will do is you will search on the web. I can say, okay, my camera, Linksys camera model 1234. What is the latest firmware? You will download it and you'll install it. But are you sure that the firmware was actually manufactured by Linksys, or is it a malware? Right? Many people or many of those devices will not do any signature verification. But for example, in your laptop, if you're trying to download a patch for Windows and you're trying to install it, it will actually make sure that the patch was made by Windows. So laptops would do that. Your smartphone would do that. But many IoT devices wouldn't. They don't bother checking the signatures and making sure that it's actually manufactured by the original manufacturer of the software. And then there are other security issues. Some of them we have probably already talked about hard-coded credentials. Many times it's difficult to upgrade the firmware and the operating system on those IoT devices. In many cases, the vendor, the manufacturer of the IoT device, they will manufacture their device, sell it to you, and then there is no more technical support. If you have a laptop, Windows will always provide technical support, and then it will provide patches and so on. But for IoT devices, usually none. And then there are vulnerable web interfaces. You can have coding errors. Passwords may be sent in clear text and things like that. So this is something to just to give you an idea about what kind of security issues might be there. And then there are some other things which make security a little bit more challenging. IoT devices generate a lot of data, and a lot of this data might have monetary value. So that makes it attractive for adversaries. So IoT gets attacked. If I attack something, for example, a camera or an IoT device on a factory, once I hack into one, it becomes very easy to propagate and compromise other devices. So it's a little bit more easier here. And there are a large number of identical devices. So for example, we were talking about the camera. There are thousands of such cameras. You figure out a vulnerability on one, the exact same vulnerability exists on all the other cameras. So then there are things, right? And then since there are no user interfaces, you don't know whether the IoT devices is running properly or misbehaving, right? Which you can actually do with your laptop. So things like this, right? So it's in the interest of time, probably I'll just go a little bit quicker. So now let's talk a little bit about what does it take to secure an IoT system. Okay? There are many things you need to do. First thing is you need to secure your data handling framework. You need to be able to control who, from the starting point where the data is generated to the end point where the data is being consumed. Right? And you need to have a framework for the establishment of trust management. So managing trust, how do you know whom to trust and whom you believe? So that's very important. It's also very important to do access control and account management. So most of these IoT devices, there is no screen, right? So in those cases, you really don't know who is accessing and what device you're interacting with. So in these cases, managing the account and access control is very, very important. And when you're trying to select protocols, when you're trying to decide, should I do UDP or TCP? Should I do MQTT, right? You need to select protocols that are secure. And then there are other things such as you need to have a firewall and you need to update the antiviruses and so on, and make sure all your IoT devices are patched and things like that. And in order to secure an IoT device, it's not IoT system, it's not enough to just secure the IoT device. There's a whole ecosystem around it. So for example, starting from the apps, starting from the device vendor to the platform developers, the people who write the networking protocols. So all of these, they have to come in and they have to work together to make sure that the system is secure. Okay? So now let me take a couple of minutes to talk about one particular aspect of IoT security, and that is actually physical security for IoT devices. So now imagine what you did when you had to, let's say, log into your email this morning or today. When you were trying to, let's say, access Gmail, you had to put in your username and password, right? And as humans, we remember the password in our head, right? So our brain remembers that password. But if you think about an IoT device and it needs to authenticate, it also needs to send a username and password. But for an IoT device, there is no human sitting behind who will input this username and password. The device needs to do it on its own. So how will the device know what is the username and password? The way you do it is you store this username and password in the memory of the device, right? So now physical security means you have deployed the IoT device somewhere out in the open, and I go and I will steal your IoT device. So if I steal your IoT device, now I can open it up and I can take out the memory chip. And if I take out the memory chip, now I can connect to the I can put the chip somewhere else, or I can connect wires to the pins of that chip. And then I can read in the memory what is the username and what is the password, right? So this makes IoT devices particularly vulnerable to physical security issues, right? So then what we would like ideally to do is we would like to come up with a security solution that doesn't rely on these secrets, which are usernames and passwords that are stored in the memory. So what can we do? So if you think about humans, so we're of course talking about username and password, but how else do we identify humans? So for example, if you come from a foreign country and let's say you're coming into India at the airport, they will ask you to do your fingerprint, right? So they will check your fingerprint. So humans are uniquely identified by their fingerprints, which is whatever the thing is there on the skin. So one option then is let's create these fingerprints for IoT devices or any device for that matter. And how will we create these fingerprints? Based on hardware, right? Based on their semiconductor chips that they're using. And in this case, what we will do is during the manufacturing process of a semiconductor or an IC, there are certain things that happen that give unique features to every chip. So you make a large number of chips, but each of those chips will have some unique feature, and that you can use as a fingerprint. And I'll show you how you can do that, right? And in this case, these fingerprints are what are called physical unclonable functions. And the way they are made is we exploit certain process variations that occur during the fabrication process. So let me quickly walk you through how the semiconductor or IC manufacturing process would work. So you would usually start with a silicon base, and then you would put some masking on top of it. Then you'll put a photoresist, and then whatever circuit you want to build, there will be a mask, right? And that will correspond to the circuit you want to build. And then you'll shine some ultraviolet lights on top, And then the part which is covered by this mask will not be exposed to that ultraviolet. The part that is not covered will be exposed. And then you will etch, and then you will get your circuit. Right? And in the end, your circuit would look something like this, right? There is some metal and so on. But what happens is when you are shining this light and doing this etching and so on, the width of these wires, the width of this wire and the width of this wire, this is very, very small, right? And these days we talk in terms of a few tenths of nanometers. So when you're trying to manufacture wires that are so thin, even a little bit of shift. So for example, if the light here is shifted even by 1 nanometer and so on, it will make a difference to the wire. So for example, when we are trying to build, so for example, the original layout might be like this H shape here. But when you build, this will not be an exact shape. And today it might look like this, and tomorrow, this might look a little bit narrower. So every time you manufacture, there are some variations. And for example, when you're talking about 130 nanometers, if you're trying to make a wire which is 90 nanometers in length, there is usually some variation, about 5 nanometers, right? Almost 5% variation in the length. So what we can do is we can exploit this and come up with signatures based on this. So I'll just give you an example of what this means. Right? So imagine this circuit. Okay? So these are multiplexers. Okay? And this is a flip-flop or a latch. Okay? And what I do is I give a same clock to both. And if you look at the way this is organized, the same signal goes to both inputs of the multiplexer. And then I give some input bits as challenge. So if I give a 0, both of these multiplexers will select this. Sorry, both of them will select this path. If I give another 0 here, both of them will select this path. If I give a 1 here, both of them will select the 1 input. And if you look at this, at the end of the day, there is a blue path that you can follow. And then there is a red path that you can follow. And at least on paper here, let me clear everything here. At least on paper, both of those paths are identical, right? The blue path coming to the D input, oops, sorry. The blue path coming to the, sorry, what's happening? Right? The blue path coming here and the red path coming here, they're actually identical. There is no difference. But because of all these variations that happen during the manufacturing process, what would happen is one of these paths will be a little bit longer than the other, maybe by just 1 nanometer or 2 nanometers, but one of them will be longer. And as a result, either the blue path will be shorter or the red path will be shorter. And if the blue path is shorter, this flip-flop will give a 1. And if this path is shorter, the flip-flop will register as 0. And you have no control. This is totally random and decided what happens during the manufacturing process. Okay? And this is just one random bit that I get. Now imagine that I take this same circuit and I build many of them in parallel. So then I can get many of these bits as the output. And then what I call is, I call this as a challenge and this as the response. Okay? And every time I make this circuit, I will, even if I give the same challenge, I will get a different response at the output. And that is because I cannot really control the length of these bits. They're generated randomly during the manufacturing process. So this brings us to what we do. So if you have different chips with the same circuit and you give the same challenge to all of them, you will get a different response. And consequently, we say that this is a fingerprint. And in my work, what we do is we take this thing that we are saying that we have access to these kind of physical unclonable functions. And then we try to, for example, propose mutual authentication protocols where the IoT device needs to authenticate itself with the server. And instead of using stored username and password, we will use these challenge response pairs and we use them to to do the authentication of the device. And my intention was to sort of walk you through a very simple protocol like this, where we have an authentic how we I would walk you through how a device authenticates itself with the server by using these challenge response pairs. And in this case, what is happening is instead of storing usernames and passwords, the device would be given a challenge, and then it would have to respond with the appropriate response. And the response will be unique to that particular device because each device is unique. Okay? So that was sort of the plan, but I think I don't want to get into the technical details of all of this and so on. And what we have also done is we have implemented this whole thing in a chip. I have a colleague who manufactures semiconductor chips, and he put this into actually a Zigbee-based radio. And we have this whole puff-based thing and the crypto core that uses this whole scheme. And then I have some results that talk about how much energy it takes and what is the overhead in terms of the message complexity. Okay, so that's sort of, I think this was supposed to be a 2-hour event. Probably I took a little bit more time, but I'm sorry about that. This is just to conclude. So hopefully I gave you an overview of why security is an important issue in IoT. And I also talked a little bit about some of the security related challenges in IoT systems. And I wanted to motivate one specific security problem, which is hardware security. Sorry, which is physical security for IoT devices. And I want to give you one idea about how to solve or address that problem. And that is through the use of physical unclonable functions. Thank you very much. So if you have any, I don't know if we have time for it, but if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, sir. We are really overwhelmed to thank Dr. Siddharth to open up the avenues and pathways of research on cybersecurity related issues in IoT applications with his illuminating technical session. Now the session is open for interaction, and I am happy to share that, including the questions posted in the question answer area, and as well as in the chat box. Over 60 questions we have received total during 2 sessions. So I would like to request Shantani ma'am to take few quick questions. Shantani ma'am.
Hello. Yes, ma'am. I have sorted out few of the questions. One question is like lightweight security algorithm used for low power IoT, but how these lightweight security algorithms provide better security?
Yeah, so that's the security challenge, right? So with IoT devices, one thing you can do is you can say, okay, I'm going to do a trade-off. I'm going to trade off security with energy, for example. Right? And you may say that if I just have a temperature sensor that's measuring, what is the temperature in my room, maybe I don't care about security so much. Let it be. Right? Even if a hacker comes in and changes 25 degrees to 26 degrees, I may not care so much. But if it is something related to, let's say, biomedical sensors, maybe I care. Right? So in that case, of course, it's a challenge that how do you ensure security? And that's where did my slide go? Did I stop sharing or am I still sharing? Can't remember.
No, sir, we can see you.
Oh, you can see me now. I am sharing, hopefully. So because
Yeah, slides are visible now. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Right. So here is the answer to your question, that at some point you have to decide that what is more important to you. Do you care more about energy or do you care more about security, right? So for example, we can do a trade-off here by saying, okay, if I use bigger key sizes, I will get more security, right? Larger key sizes are more secure, but then the energy consumed will also be higher. So when we talk about lightweight security protocols, one way is to provide this kind of a trade-off, right? And then the other thing is you move away from, for example, RSA. Those are very, very energy intensive. So in the security protocol that I was just showing you, there is not much to be done in terms of things which consume a lot of energy. For example, exponentiation. We don't need to do exponentiation. You just need to pass a challenge through a circuit and get something at the output. Maybe you rely on simple functions such as hash, which are less energy consumption, which are less energy intensive. So as designers of these protocols, what you want to do is you want to come up with these primitives which consume less energy, but provably they will give you the same level of security as let's say something that's based on modular arithmetic or exponentiation. So that's how a lightweight protocol would still give you the same level of security as a traditional protocol, okay? by by moving away from the root of trust. In this case, the root of trust is the hardware itself. So if I can trust the hardware itself, then maybe I don't need to rely on highly energy intensive operations that are required by traditional solutions. So that's probably the way to go. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Another question is there any way to stop the kind of DOS attack in the IoT device? As in the website, there is, I am not a robot system, is kind of techniques is
Hmm.
there, but is any kind of system is technique is used in the IoT devices?
Uh, Ultimately, if you look at most of the telecom operators, I guess in India, for example, Vodafone or Jio or Airtel, ultimately for denial of service attacks, uh, especially from the point of view of the servers that are being targeted, it's really based on filtering. So you have to monitor and you have to have some kind of an intelligence that says, okay, this is normal traffic, this is abnormal traffic. And when it comes to abnormal traffic, you just block it. So that's how a traditional solution would stop you from stop a denial of service attack. There's no other way. You just have to block that traffic, right? If you're looking at it from the point of view of, okay, I own this IoT device, but I don't want it to be hacked in and become part of something that's used for launching a denial of service attack. In that case, probably what you need to do is periodically you need to see and verify, for example, what we call software attestation. You want to make sure that the software in your IoT device has not been changed, right? Or you want to look at it from the point of view of that nothing suspicious is going on. So what you could do, for example, if I go back here, if you have a proper firewall in place, um, still going, yeah. In this particular figure, this was my computer and somebody's trying to get in. If I have a proper firewall in place, hopefully I'll be able to block these things, right? And if I'm able to block the actual binary from coming in and the actual attack command from coming in, then hopefully I will not be a victim. IoT devices don't really interact, for example, the way humans would. So we can look at pictures, or you can do, I'm a human kind of thing. You can, Google will ask you to select images of traffic lights or whatever it is. IoT devices won't be able to do that. So in that sense, probably the best way to do is you ensure that your firewall so that it block all these things that are coming from outside. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Another question related to this is the fabrication inherent variation used as hardware signature?
Yes, that's the one that is being used to create the hardware signature. But you will need to create some special circuits like the one that I was showing. I know that there will be variations when I'm making the circuit. So I design a circuit in such a way that I will be able to exploit these inherent variations. So this particular circuit that I showed here, this is based on actually exploiting the fact that there will be variations. So this is not the only circuit that we can come up with. So there's a whole research area that works on exploiting the variations and say, okay, what circuit can I develop that will exploit these variations and that will give me a unique fingerprint to this device. So this is what is called an arbiter puff. There are other things, for example, that use ring oscillators and things like that to get the job done. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Many questions are there. So one question is, even the IoT devices using UDP has some encryption problem, and those IoT devices are directly connected our phone, and using our phones, we do
Yeah.
our monetary transactions nowadays. So in case,
Right.
how you can keep our data privatized?
Yeah. So that's always a risk. So the thing is, if you really want to be secure, you shouldn't be on the network, right? But then that serves no purpose. We want convenience of what a network gives us. So the fact is that if you are connected on the network, you will never be 100% secure. You cannot do that, right? And everybody understands that and believes that. But then you say, okay, how much am I willing to live with, right? So if you think that this is a device that I use for monetary transactions, this is a device that I use for logging into my bank account, best thing you could do is you don't connect that device to something that's not secure, or you don't use that device to go to certain websites where you shouldn't be visiting because they will drop malware on you. So that's just a thing in terms of personal hygiene that you need to maintain, just to make sure that you minimize your risk or you minimize your exposure. As long as you're connected to the network, somebody someday will find out a way to get in. The example that I was giving you of the nuclear reactor in Iran, that's actually not even connected to the network, but still people got in. How? Using thumb drives, using USB drives. So they figured out a way to put a malware on a USB drive and placing it in certain place that an employee of that nuclear power reactor would pick up that USB drive and plug it into their computer. Right? So even if you're not connected to a network, still you'll get malware. You can get malware, right? So yeah, the bottom line or the answer is you will never be able to protect yourself 100%. All you can do is you can minimize the risk. So if you have an IoT device which is insecure, don't connect it to your phone. If you're going to use your phone for banking transactions or Paytm or whatever it is.
Very informative, sir. Next question is, can edge computing with IoT gives more security?
Uh, Not necessarily. What edge computing will only do is, it'll just make up things a little bit faster. Right? The reason we do edge computing is usually in the case of latency sensitive applications. So I don't want my data to need to go all the way to the cloud server and get processed there. So for example, if I'm talking about autonomous vehicles, the time it'll take for the car sensor reading to go to the cloud, get a decision, and based on that, my car will react. That doesn't work. That's way too long. So I would do it based on edge computing so that the servers are close to me, and then I can ask a nearby server to do my computations and give me the decision much more quickly. Right? But then you have to remember that you are not the only one who's using this edge server. If if my car is connected to this edge server, your car is also connected. So can you then be sure that somebody else who's also using that edge server is not doing anything malicious there, right? Can you, if your car is connected to some edge server, what if somebody launches a denial of service attack on that edge server? Right? So yeah, I don't really think that using edge servers will particularly solve or eliminate security problems. Maybe it'll be helpful in some cases, But on the other side, it will also introduce other security problems.
Okay, so there are so many other questions also still now. So
Yeah.
we that are posted in the question answer area that can be taken offline. But as the today's webinar is focused on healthcare, so I would end this we have to end this interactive session with the question that posted by one of the participants is that security of how can we ensure security of sensitive health data in IoT?
Yeah. So I think that there are a couple of things. If they're very, very sensitive, they're very, healthcare data could be many things, right? So the previous speaker, he was talking about an insulin pump, right? That's healthcare. Also, the Fitbit or a smartwatch that I have, that's also measuring my blood pressure or something. That's also healthcare, right? So each of these requires a different level of security. So the more sensitive ones, for example, the insulin pump or your pacemaker, what you have to do is you have to ensure that you go in with the highest level of security solutions that you have in possible. So for example, if I have a choice of using a 16-bit key or a 64-bit key or a 128-bit key, probably I should be using the 128-bit key option, right? Similarly, if I have a choice of, some of the other things that I was talking about, if it's an insulin pump, you need to work with the manufacturer to say that, you cannot hard code in passwords. So that if somebody buys an insulin pump, they know that password, everybody else will also know the password. So there are other things. So security has to be built in by design. Many of these IoT device vendors, they don't think about security in the first place. It turns out later on that somebody hacks into that and then they think, right? So specifically for medical devices, we need to make sure that when they are designing the device, security is one of the things that is built into that. So probably these kinds of changes need to be made in the mindset, and then security will be an integral part of these things.
So thank you very much, sir,
Yeah.
for